Hello, welcome to the latest episode of the Data Unchained podcast. I'm the host, Molly Presley. Before I introduce today's guest, let me give you a little bit of background about what this podcast covers for those of you who are new to us. So Data Unchained was founded as we started to look at how data usage has changed over the last 30, 40 years, going back to thinking of a world where the mainframe was created and all of the data and the data users and applications were sitting around the compute environment. And then you fast forward to today where devices in our homes, the cloud, AI models are all distributed, and the data that's powering them can be really decentralized as well. What we cover in this podcast is some of the challenges around this decentralized data, as well as some of the solutions, the technologies, and best practices to address it. And ultimately, some of the business outcomes you can get if you tackle this decentralized data problem and put it to work for your business to create new research outcomes, new business best practices, that type of thing. So without further ado, I would like to introduce today's guest. Ellison Anne Williams is the founder and CEO of Enveil. Ellison Anne, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me, Molly. I'm happy to be here.
So before we talk about Enveil, tell us maybe just a little bit about you for our guests to understand kind of like what is your background, what led you to founding the company Enveil?
So for as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to do what I'm doing today, which is, grow a business, create a market, things like that. So really an entrepreneur at heart. However, if you kind of look at my background from a training perspective and some of the previous experiences that I've had, that wouldn't necessarily be completely obvious. So mathematician by training, and then directly kind of out of the PhD program in math, went to the U.S. intelligence community inside of the National Security Agency for about 12 years before starting Enveil, the company.
As far as Enveil, maybe tell us a little bit about the company and how the background ties to what you guys are doing today.
So Enveil is a privacy-enhancing technology company. So we build software to protect the usage of data. So when data is being used or processed, which enables all types of organizations to extract secure insights across boundaries and silos of data. So how does that have to kind of lend itself to tie in with the time in the intelligence community? So one of the core pillars of the privacy-enhancing technology family is a technology called homomorphic encryption. And what it allows you to do, in a technical term, is to perform computations in the encrypted domain or ciphertext space as if they're kind of in the unencrypted world or the plain text world. So the so what of that is you could take a search that contains a sensitive indicator, you could encrypt it, and then you could run it without decrypting it at any point during processing. So when I was back in the intelligence community, we faced a huge problem where you have access to a very large amount of data in locations that you don't necessarily own, you don't control, nor do you trust, but you need to be able to use it securely in those environments in a way that, of course, respects your interest and intent and doesn't expose it outside of your walls. So, for example, I want to go and understand, does that data that's outside of my walls contain any information around Joe Bad Guy at yahoo.com? But I can't expose the fact that I'm looking for Joe Bad Guy at yahoo.com anytime outside of my walls. How do I solve that problem? So it turns out that is a perfect use case for that type of encryption that I call homomorphic encryption, because I can take that question for, do you have any information on Joe Bad Guy at yahoo.com? I can encrypt it in form of an encrypted search, and then I can send it out and have it process over all of that data without ever decrypting at any point during processing, without ever exposing that I'm interested in Joe Bad Guy at yahoo.com or any associated results. Super powerful, completely changes the paradigm around how and where not only the kind of U.S. government, but also any organization can securely and privately leverage data to get insights from it in ways that you could have never done before. The problem at that time, and this is about a decade ago, is that technology, while very powerful, was very computationally intensive. So you could do it. You could perform that search. You could get the insights from these different, data silos across the boundaries, all that kind of good stuff. But it could take you hours or days over a very small amount of data. So possible, but not practical. So sometimes being a mathematician comes in handy, not always, but sometimes. And so we were able to kind of look at that problem differently, turn it upside down, and develop some techniques and methodologies to allow it to be practical for the first time ever. So you could, in fact, take that search for Joe Bad Guy, you could encrypt it within the trusted walls, and you could send it out and have it processed without ever being decrypted and get those results in a time frame that was relevant to the objectives that you were trying to achieve. So I took a look at that technology and said, well, wait a minute. This technology that's been incredibly powerful but incredibly impractical for decades at this point has the potential to change, like I said, that entire paradigm of how and where any type of organization across verticals can use data to get value out of it that they could have never done before. I want to go take this out. Built a company around it and create an entirely new market around what's known today as privacy-enhancing technologies. So I saw that as an opportunity and went through a lot of process, as you could imagine, to be able to do that cleanly, and then raised some venture capital money, and then the rest is kind of public history from there.
A variety of questions I want to kind of jump into kind of from a high level so folks can understand how this might apply in their workloads. I think probably most organizations, you're talking about national security and government, have other encryption technologies in place today, whether it's for data at rest or data, in motion across a network, that type of thing. How does this complement other encryption strategies? Is it instead of? Is it in addition to? Is there concerns of one algorithm affecting the other algorithm?
So data has 3 states from which all types of protections, tooling are derived. It's sitting at rest in the file system. So this is in the database, et cetera. It's moving around, as you pointed out, in motion through the network data in transit, or it's being used or processed. So privacy-enhancing technologies serve to protect very uniquely the data when it's being used or processed. So how do you use or process data? Well, you're going to run a search or you're going to run an analytic over it. One of those two things. Analytics to us also include very buzzy things like AI or machine learning. So search, of course, is not nearly as sexy as AI ML or from an analytic perspective, but under the hood, it does power the world today. But in order to get value, to get insights out of that data that's otherwise just sitting there at rest in the file system or in the database, you have to run a search over it. You have to run some kind of analytic over it to pull that out. That's where privacy-enhancing technologies come in and protect that. They're completely complementary. They do not replace technologies that are used to protect data at rest. So this is your classic, database encryption, field-level encryption, things like that, or technologies that are used to protect data in transit.
Okay, makes perfect sense. And I have looked at your LinkedIn profile recently and know you have kind of a triangle imagery that you use about the different phases of data usage. And I'm pointing this out for our listeners that, kind of emphasizing data and use on your piece and complementing the other technologies. Because, of course, security threats are a big concern right now and privacy is a big concern. So that makes a ton of sense. So let's talk a little bit about why is it important for data to be used across locations or outside of kind of that database or storage system silo? In your world, you talk about AI and ML, but what are some of the other use cases you're seeing?
So one of the ones that I think illustrates it very nicely in financial services is around understanding risk exposure, the risk profile of an entity in one jurisdiction as it relates to other jurisdictions where that entity may or may not be banked inside of one entity or financial services institution. So this is more kind of cross-jurisdictional secure data collaboration is kind of the umbrella that we would put it under. But so, for example, if I am a global bank and I am banking an entity in Singapore and I'm watching them maybe for questionable activity relating to some kind of economic crime. And I want to know, first and foremost, is this Singaporean entity being banked anywhere else in my own bank? Seems reasonable. And then secondarily, if they are being banked somewhere in my bank, Are they also watching them for questionable activity? Are there risk indicators associated with that entity? So those both seem, to me at least, to be very reasonable questions that you would want to ask, but they're extremely difficult to get the answers to in practice, just because those boundaries and silos around data that have to be respected are driven by jurisdictions or country boundaries that have different kind of regulatory and data residency and localization requirements associated with them. So if I ask my UK jurisdiction or my Swiss jurisdiction, do you know anything about the Singaporean entity? Are you banking them? Then I'm exposing Singaporean information outside of Singapore in the UK, in Switzerland, which could be extremely problematic. So privacy enhancing technologies come in and help solve that problem very cleanly, because I can take that question for, are you banking the Singaporean entity? I can encrypt that question in Singapore, and I can send that encrypted question now out to all of my other operating jurisdictions within the bank. So out to the UK and Switzerland and Turkey and Germany, et cetera. And because it processes in those operating jurisdictions without ever being decrypted, no Singaporean information is ever revealed outside of Singapore. Encrypted results, of course, automatically produced come back to Singapore, where only then they're decrypted. And you can say, wait a minute, the Singaporean entity that I had no idea was being banked anywhere else in my own bank is actually being banked in the UK. Perhaps they're also watching them for questionable activity. I need to take follow-on action from there. So that's just a really simple example where those silos and boundaries are driven by operating jurisdictions within the same bank, where now you can get insights in a matter of time, seconds really, that you could have never gotten before the same, either at all or in the same kind of time frame. So really changing that paradigm from a single customer view perspective.
I'm curious, in putting this into operation and organization, do users know it's happening? Is this something kind of the IT team puts in place and is transparent to the users? What does this look like once it's deployed?
It depends on how they want to consume it. So for the way we build the software around privacy enhancing technologies, it's completely modular and API based and all that good stuff. So, I'm of the kind of viewpoint that a lot of times end users or analysts, if that's who you're going to interface with in the organization, the last thing they need is yet another tool to sit in front of, another UI to kind of swivel their chair
typically their
around
preference, right?
and look at it, right? So if we can instead hook in through API into their existing workflows and their existing tools, and we can provide them a greater range of insights that otherwise they couldn't have obtained before, awesome. Everybody wins. Now, sometimes your kind of end consumer or user is not a human being in front of a screen. It is a workflow. And so that's fully through API mechanisms. Okay. Sometimes what we find is that because this is such a game-changing paradigm for people, they don't want to hook these kinds of technologies and capabilities into existing workflows or existing systems. They want to build a whole new workflow and system around them. So, from that kind of ethos was born a production UI that if somebody really wants it and they do not have a user interface, they can use one that we already have. And they're welcome to do that. But that's not our first line of, I would say, defense when we go out and talk to people about consuming data insights.
And when you talk about the types of data you're managing, you mentioned databases, file systems. Does this tend to span all of an organization or enterprise? It seems like you're kind of focused sometimes more in governments, but I'm sure enterprise customers too. Is it all of their data, or do they tend to kind of have a specific type of data or data set that they're concerned with when using your technologies?
It's driven by the use case.
Okay.
So why are they doing it? What types of data do they want to draw insights from that they can't otherwise do? And that's what we would deploy with an override hook into. So it's very use case dependent in terms of the type of data. And then in terms of the structure of data and where it is and things like that, there's such a range. So we recognize there's a range within the organization. It's very heterogeneous in terms of structured, unstructured, and then even within structured and unstructured, what type of data is in there? Is it textual? Is it non-textual? Things like that. So we're very, I like to say, somewhat agnostic to that. We can work with all types and good kind of privacy enhancing technology capabilities are able to handle that wide range of data, because that's what happens in the real world.
I'd love to understand, as a use case, how does privacy enhancing technology apply within AI? Certainly there's data privacy being loaded into models, but there's also, you're talking about queries and questions you're asking. How does this relate to AI?
So AI, or I'll say machine learning, the unit of work in AI or ML is a model. It doesn't matter what kind of AI you're talking about. It still kind of comes down to a model-centric perspective. And so what's very well known today, but has always been true, is that these machine learning models encode or contain the data over which they were trained. That's pretty universally accepted at this point and well known. So that means that if you've trained your model, meaning your model's learned, you've trained it over sensitive data, then your model contains that sensitive data. So if you now want to go run your model, let's use that jurisdictional example. If I've trained my model over sensitive Singaporean data, and now I want to go run my model, maybe to get insights from it. Maybe it's behavioral types of analytics or indicators of compromise or fraud or whatever the case may be. If I want to go now run that model across my operating jurisdictions with the bank, then in the UK, Switzerland, Germany, then it's essentially the same thing as taking that sensitive Singaporean training data and sending it out to the UK, Switzerland, and Germany when I send the model out to be trained. So it just follows and inherits. So then, of course, if you kind of look at the risks associated with that, you say, well, wait a minute, if I'm going to send my model that I've trained in Singapore out over to Switzerland, for example, and it's really the same thing as sending my Singaporean training data, maybe I can't even do that at all. That doesn't make sense. So where privacy enhancing technologies come in and help solve that problem is it can take that sensitive model and it can encrypt the model and then send that model out and have it run for evaluation, inference, or be further trained in a completely encrypted capacity. So because the model is never decrypted outside of the walls as it's being processed, which is inference or training, then you never have an opportunity to see the model or any of its kind of output as it's either producing inference or it's learning. So if you can't see the model, then you don't have an opportunity to pull any of that sensitive data out of the model over which it was trained. So the net effect of all of that is that security now enables the business to use these sensitive models in ways and places that it could have never done before. And so that's the most simple explanation. Now, as you can imagine, we just barely skimmed the surface of that. There's a ton of layer of detail about what types of models that works for and how big the models can be and all of that. But that's, in essence, the so what around AI plus privacy enhancing technologies. It's just allowing you to get insights from sensitive models in ways and places you couldn't before, or make your model smarter over data in ways and places that you could not do before.
Fascinating. So at what point does an organization typically bring you all in? Do they have a problem they're looking to solve? Does the governance team say, hey, you need to go put privacy enhancing technology in? What is the pain point that people typically have when they reach out to you?
So the pain point is going to be some kind of specific problem that they're trying to solve that relates to getting insights from data across those boundaries and silos where there's sensitivity involved. So you heard the pain point around understanding risk exposure with entities within a global bank across their operating jurisdictions. So that's not governance, for example, that would bring you in. That's kind of maybe a counterintuitive point on privacy enhancing technologies. So yes, there is the word, there's a P in privacy enhancing technologies. It does help protect privacy, but only because privacy is one type of sensitivity that you would have in sensitive information.
Okay.
So think about, IP between different organizations. So think about pharma companies securely collaborating for drug research purposes. So there's not necessarily a privacy driver there. There could be. Maybe there's more of an IP driver between them. So not only governance compliance, but more whoever owns the actual business problem that needs to be solved.
Okay. Absolutely makes sense. And When you think about what's next on the horizon, it sounds like this is pretty broad-reaching technology that could have a lot of implications to a lot of different types of workflows. What will be coming next? Are you enhancing the algorithms? Are you working on new use cases? Kind of how will this continue to grow over the next couple of years?
So privacy enhancing technologies, of course, this kind of new market motion. So if you go back about 10 years and if you could go back in the Wayback Machine and Google privacy enhancing technologies, you would get maybe a couple of research papers that popped up. So over the last, I would say, decade, privacy enhancing technologies has gone through kind of classic new market motions where first you have to make people aware that, wait a minute, they exist. Now, what do they do? And then you start kind of going piece by piece from the different kind of use cases and adoption and things like that. Now, the kind of blessing and curse of new market of privacy enhancing technologies is so horizontal. So it applies to so many things. That's awesome. But first you need to kind of get concrete bucket of things to start with and then grow it from there. So in terms of what's next, I think that ties into that kind of market ethos that the market's being created. So it's expanding the types of verticals, the types of use cases that are adopting privacy enhancing technologies to really solve some of these challenges around getting data insights across silos that you couldn't get before. Whether that's, no matter how that happens, whether that's search, whether that's AI, machine learning, whatever the case may be. And then, of course, from there, being very public about that, building that out. And then, of course, the technology always continues to advance.
And as you think about our audience who's listening, and maybe privacy enhancing technology is new to them, or maybe they have heard of it but haven't done anything with it, what's the best way to learn? Do you have user groups? Is there a certain video that you tend to point people to? Like, how do people get started in assessing if this is right for their organization?
So in this educational journey, like I described over the last kind of 9 years or so of building the market, we've created a ton of just educational content to help people better understand what are privacy enhancing technologies, why do they matter, how do they apply to different kinds of verticals and different kinds of use cases. So if you go to our website, you'll find a ton of good just educational information. And we also have, an FAQ page where you can, just around privacy enhancing technologies. So what are they? What is homomorphic encryption? What's secure multi-party computation? What are trusted execution environments or confidential computing? How do they work together? How are they complementary? How is it that there's not one great technology and the rest are bad? It's just pick the right combination of technologies to serve the needs of the use case. All that kind of information. I would say that's a great place to find it.
I was looking through some of your materials over the past couple of weeks as we were planning to have this conversation. It looks like you had a new software announcement a couple of months ago, your 6.0 release that was talking about spanning deployment models is the way I think that, maybe not quite the words you use, but talking about edge, IoT, cloud. Can you talk just a little about the reach of the types of data sets and where you can be deployed related to environmentals like that?
For sure. As you saw in the product announcement, the kind of zero reveal search, which is, some of the core where we started as a company, even though we have AI or ML product lines today, is on 6.0. That's pretty mature, right? Deployed, operational, that kind of good stuff. And so at the beginning of the company, the working premise was that people would want to use us in very kind of large form factor distributed computing environments because we got our start over very large volumes of data. But what we found over time is that there were really powerful and interesting use cases, not only in these big distributed kinds of computing situations where you have a lot of data, but also in situations where you have really small amounts of data. So think very small form factor devices. It's very public that we were part of DIU's hybrid space architecture program within the US government. So in that kind of a context, you have all these different commercial and government space assets, which can be ground-based stations, they could be in-orbit stations, things like that. So it's very heterogeneous types of platforms and deployment models where you would want to put this piece of software in order to get secure insights from the data on those small platforms in a very kind of quick and private way. So that's kind of the reference point there when you're starting to talk about the wide range of deployment models everywhere from, all the three major cloud platforms natively with, distributed computing infrastructures and things like that, all the way down to tiny, tiny little kind of sensor platforms ARM chips and things like that we can run on, which, I think is pretty exciting in terms of taking a look at all the different use cases that you can address under that kind of boundaries of data. How do you get insights quickly at the edge, all the way down to small devices?
When you talk about scale, you're talking about small to large, but it sounds like you're also thinking about the types of data sources that could be, you talk about commercial, open source, third party. Maybe just go a little deeper into kind of the breadth of data sources you're supporting now, if there's anything on the horizon that you want to tackle next. I think that would be worth talking through a little bit as well.
So we've supported a wide range of data sources nearly since the beginning. Of course, a lot of data is textual. So we see a lot of textual data in enterprises. We see a lot of structured data in terms of data that people are using today to solve business problems. So, that typically is what we see most often. However, there's a ton of unstructured data, as you well know, out there. So, we see that as well. And then also non-textual data. So this is more types of imagery, geospatial, signaling, sensor data, things like that we can work with.
So these ever-growing unstructured sources that everyone's trying to figure out how to harness and harness in a responsible sort of way certainly is, something I think all companies are trying to figure out right now in their AI strategies in particular. That makes sense. Ellison Anne, this is a really interesting conversation, and technology I personally find super interesting. In the space I sit in, we're always talking about AES encryption standards, and maybe we need quantum computers to tackle the next encryption problems. It's really interesting to see you doing this through smart math and interesting mathematical algorithms. I love the approach in this world where things are moving so fast with ML and AI as well. Where would you point people as the next step if they want to check things out? It sounds like maybe just pointing them to your website to access all the educational materials you've put together over the last decade.
Yeah, for sure. If you have any questions, want to check it out a little bit more, please go to our website, enveil.com, enveil.com. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can do that through the website as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much for taking time to join the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Data Unchained, powered by Hammerspace. To learn more, visit hammerspace.com. If you have a guest you would like to hear on the show, email me at molly@hammerspace.com.